Ben Carson hates the idea that people are injecting race into police cases. Let's take a look at this video from Face the Nation.
Dr. Carson, I wanted to see if we could pick up on something that Bernie Sanders said there about the Sandra Bland case. What's your take on it? He said that her situation shows that an African American is treated so differently by the police than if she were a white woman. What's your reaction to that?
There is no question that, we need to be looking at those kinds of issues, but I think we also have a tendency to inject race into everything. Anytime that there are people of different races involved in a conflict. Are there rotten police officers? Of course there are. Just like there are rotten lawyers and rotten doctors and rotten teachers and rotten journalists. But we don't condemn the whole class for that. Having said that, there's no question that we need to be looking at some of the various things that are going on in the Justice Department to make it more sensitive to people. For instance, somebody gets a moving violation, they got a minimum wage job, they're barely making it. That thing costs like $170. They don't have any way of paying that. They ignore it. The next thing you know, there's a warrant for their arrest. They lose their job. All we have to do is be a little sensitive and say, look, you can pay this off at $5 a week. These are the kinds of things that I think will make a difference in our society.
But sensitive to class and economic situation, not to race.
Right. A lot of things that are class and economics are ascribed to race, no question.
Yeah, but those two things, at this moment, they're related. No doubt that there's some issues of, okay, so there's a lot of poor people who are white. I understand that. There's a lot of poor people who are black. In fact, poor people are disproportionately African American, and especially when it comes to inner cities. So when you're talking about that issue of classism, race is a factor in that. You can't just ignore that. But see, Ben Carson, he's of the mind that, racism doesn't exist. I'm proof of that. I got over my my inherent nature and I became successful. Really? Okay, well, no. What he means is, hey, black people, work a little harder. Work a little harder. Get a job, stop being criminals, and then, you'll be able to afford things, then you won't get into trouble with the law. Do what I did. Do what I did, and stop being lazy criminals. That's essentially what it is. Look, here's the thing, right? As I mentioned, communities that are more heavily African American often have, they're often more poorer because they have less job opportunity. Perhaps combating structural racism and helping create this opportunity in these places might actually help. And when it comes to policing, you need to work on police training so they don't shoot unarmed African Americans. Boy, wouldn't that be a great start? Actually, maybe even the better start is admitting that there is an issue, admitting that race does have something to do with this. I don't know, Ben Carson just thinks that, you liberals, you're the real racists. You guys are playing the race card all the time. I'm not. It's a class issue. It's a class issue. Wouldn't you be instituting class warfare then? No, class and race. All of these are factors in poverty, and a lot of these are in factors of policing. I mean, to make a good point about classism, you don't see police officers heavily policing in the same way richer areas versus poorer areas. You don't see that. You don't see the same way. In fact, there are police officers that would say, no, if we want to go and make easy arrests, we go to the African American area. Why? Because if you bust the judge's son for doing pot, he's the judge's son. That's going to be a difficult case because of these connections. Well, because you have money, because you have power. So, yeah, look, classism certainly does have a factor in there, but as I said, so does racism. In fact, see, we have these structural racism. It's not as if, a lot of people are openly racist. There certainly are. But most people who are in the system, most people aren't racist. I know that will surprise people. Most people are not racist, but they do practice things of structural racism because they're not aware that it is actually racist to do so. For example, people not calling black people back for interviews because they have black names compared to the same resumes that have white names. Same qualifications, same everything, but a black sounding name. It gets less callbacks than the white sounding name. That's an example of structural racism. Or how about the people on eBay, for example? They did a study where they were selling an object, like a phone or an iPad or something like that, one held by a white hand, one held by a black hand. Well, the people trusted the seller with the white hand over the seller with the black hand. That's once again an example of structural racism. It's racism that you really don't know is racism. You don't realize it until it's pointed out. That's why I say most people aren't racist. But they do these racist things. They carry on this perpetuation of racist systems and racist stereotypes. And then you have assumptions based on that as well. And there's a lot because, well, for example, there's that assumption that a lot of black people are more violent and dangerous. Well, it's wrong. It's wrong. And look, we can consider the case of Tamir Rice as a good example of that. When he was considered dangerous because he had a toy gun. So what happened? The police shot him in 2 seconds, within 2 seconds of pulling up to him. Well, he was dangerous. He had a gun. He looked older than what he was. He was 12 years old. Police thought he looked 18 or older. So there's that. That's part of that structural racism. Now, when Carson said, and I kind of want to talk about this part, when Carson noted that there are, of course, rotten police officers, but we don't condemn the whole class for that. Well, here's the thing about that. He's right that there are rotten police officers. But he's wrong that we're condemning the entire class. No one's out there condemning the entire class of police officers. What we're looking at is, problems within policing, within the culture of policing. We're not condemning all police. In fact, police perform a vital function in society. We need them. Generally, they're a good thing. But what we're doing is that we have to examine the role that they're playing in society and the expectations of that police officer. They should be much higher than what they are now. We should expect more from our officers and train them accordingly. And part of that training should be to realize that there is a racial bias that is built structurally into the system. And they have to identify that and they have to combat that so that they can treat everyone fairly under the law. It's not a hard concept, but it has to be pointed out for people to understand.